what I'll, yep, we're good. And what I'll do is, I'm going to call John here in a couple minutes, and I'll make sure he's all set up technologically speaking, and then we'll go from there. No, no worries at all. It's totally fine. I get things come up for sure. Thanks for handling the SABR communications side, national side, for this. It's really great that they're letting us do this. Okay, cool. So I'll see you on the call then, I guess, right? And at the beginning, you're gonna just kind of intro John, and then we'll go from there. And then when you leave, I'm basically just gonna moderate the chat and the questions, right? No, that's okay. I can do that. As long as there's nothing else I need to know about it. If that's the only thing I need to do, then that's fine. That's what I'm gonna probably do. It's a hand raising thing. So basically, I'll just ask people to go and raise their hand, and if I see it, I have the ability to unmute them. So okay. All right. Um. Oh yeah. Yeah. I can have them just write questions in the chat. Okay. Perfect. Thanks, man. Appreciate everything. See you then. All right. Bye bye.
Clubs hiring professionals who might have a per game fee or a weekly salary. When the first professional league started in 1871, it was cooperative clubs which shared the gate. The players, in fact, controlled the association. So it was known as the National Association of Professional Baseball Players. The great innovation of William Hulbert and Albert Spalding in 1876 was to transform the very nature of the sport from a cooperative basis to one in which labor was controlled by capital. And the 8 original National League clubs of 1876 were all stock companies. This is the model of labor and capital, or cats and dogs, that has prevailed through all professional sports ever since. The National League of 1876 created the model for how labor and capital might interact. Now, that labor and capital might not always see things the same way was evident as early as 1879 and 1883, when the reserve clause started to kick in. And John Ward in 1885, I think it was, wrote an article for Lippincott's on is the baseball player a chattel? And chattel was a firebrand kind of word only 20 years after the conclusion of the Civil War, because chattel meant slave. So the current labor capital strife, pales before that of 1889, 90, and 91, when the National League seemed bent on suicide. It virtually controlled all 3 leagues and evaporated 2 of them. And then when the American League arose in 1900 as a challenger, the National League fought it tooth and nail. And every time that the National League seemed to lose the argument, baseball won. So it's a Zen lesson that in winning is losing, in losing is winning.
with respect to the last strike, obviously we knew the CBA was coming up, but this current situation, and I'm not going to ask you to comment on it. I'm just by way of background and context. This current situation is one that perhaps a few years ago, given the prosperity of the game and given the relative labor peace that we've had for a couple of decades, maybe seemed like it would be impossible that baseball would find itself in an antagonistic situation like this. I mean, I guess that's a little bit naive to think about it that way, but after 94, 95, even in the documentary in Burns Baseball, you know, it's discussed that, you know, baseball had learned its lesson about celebrating its players and not wanting to put itself back into the position it was in 1994, 95. Could you tell us a little bit about that 94, 95 situation and the ramifications over the quarter century since?
The 94 labor action or owner lockout, you may term it as you like, resulted in the season ending on August 12th, the World Series being canceled, and spring games, April games being canceled while replacement players played throughout spring training. This was a really dire situation, much more dire than the current one. And that everything landed more or less happily through the next 20 plus years is testament to a recognition by both labor and management that baseball is a golden goose and you can't keep taking out the eggs without endangering the goose. Short-term thinking and long-term thinking are as much at war as labor and capital.
You can choose to answer this or not. I'm not sure if this crosses over into an area that you don't want to comment on, and that's fine if you don't want to answer this.
Mm-hmm.
You said in baseball, I can't quote it exactly, but it struck me, it always has, that any number of things concern you about the world, but the demise of the game of baseball does not, and it never has. How do you feel about that statement now? And how do you feel about the game's resilience?
I think baseball survives all of us on this call and many generations beyond. And the demise of baseball was proclaimed as early as 1868, when Pete O'Brien of the Brooklyn Atlantic said, "It's a fine game, but it's not played for the same reasons as we used to in, say, 1858 or 59. And nostalgia is the engine of baseball. Larry Ritter used to say, the best part of baseball today is its yesterdays. Absolutely, the linkage of generations through the game is a strong point for baseball that does not exist in the other sports. Perhaps it does in cricket. I think that my statement on screen of 25 plus years ago that I never worry about baseball remains true. I never worry about baseball. I do have concerns about Major League Baseball as we knew it then or as we know it today. Some of the suggested changes for this year, in this very strange plague year of 2020, will carry over into 2021. And what the upshot will be remains unknown.
And that kind of segues into my next question, and that is, we are change in any endeavor seems to accelerate as time goes on, the rate of change. And with the big data era that we're living in now, the rise of advanced statistics over the last 15 years, really, 15 or 20 years, and just all of the, you know, baseball has always been a numbers game. It's always been a statistician's dream. But it's only been recently that I think it's come into vogue to have advanced metrics that are a little bit more abstract, like wins above replacement, et cetera. Given that we are living in that era, and also perhaps as a result, the 3 true outcome era of walks, strikeouts, and home runs, where do you see the game going from here in that respect, And has the statistical revolution, so to speak, been good for the game, or is it more bad for the game, or is it more nuanced than that?
The statistical analytical revolution in baseball has been good for baseball, and it's been bad for baseball in this respect, that we understand better than ever what makes a team win. And thus it's better for team construction and it's better for team instruction to know what counts more than something else. So the players are better than ever with each generation. And the science of the game is unquestionably advanced. But what we have is a conflict, to me, that is even greater than labor and capital. And that is science versus aesthetics. If we recognize that baseball is not a pure sport like, say, the 100-yard dash. In baseball, in effect, we alter the tape. We make it 95 yards in some years, and we make it 105 yards in other years, because we are always trying to create a satisfying balance between offense and defense, recognizing the theatrical nature of the sport. It is an entertainment. In fact, it is our great national drama, with the single exception that the outcome on any given day is unknown.
A lot of people, you know, I don't see it as a binary situation with respect to you know, the statistical revolution versus quote unquote old school way of looking at baseball. But a lot of people do, and in a polarized culture, that's obviously, I guess, to be expected in baseball as well. So, what do you say to the opposite poles? What do you say to the side that says numbers have ruined the game because they've taken the joy out of it, because everything is boiled down to a number rather than, like, you know, more of the aesthetic side, the pleasing side? You know, we put more emphasis on exit velocity rather than the seeing eye single, for example, or whatever it might be. And then what do you say to the other side that says, which is, you know, we'll quote Brad Pitt in Moneyball, adapt or die. You know, so I would ask you, what would you say to both sides of that?
I would say give a little. Each side has something to give. Neither side is absolutely correct. Each side needs the other. This is like a marriage. Baseball has, ever since the beginning, prided itself on becoming more scientific with each generation. Baseball in the 1880s was thought much more scientific than baseball in the 1860s. John McGraw wrote a book called Science of Baseball in 1914. Huey Fullerton and Johnny Evers created a book called Touching Second in 1910, in which there were spray charts. So everything old is new again. And I don't think we toss the numbers out, and I don't think we put blinders on and say we cannot believe in what our eyes tell us. I think, however, that the pleasure of the fan is paramount. This is an entertainment. It is a business. It is a sport. It is not, in the end, test tube science.
I love that you said, what's old is new again. Ted Williams was talking about launch angle long before we coined that term. And then, you know, obviously Branch Rickey had a lot of advanced methods during his time as well. Let's move a little bit to maybe something more of a local or regional interest here. Baseball at altitude here has been controversial, at least among people here, in terms of how the wider baseball world views performance in Denver. In your, from your perspective and in your experience, share with us maybe some of the more or lesser known situations where performance, relatively speaking, could be called into question if we were to nitpick every single different ballpark and every different team over the years, because the Coors effect is the most famous nowadays because it's easy to blame things on altitude. But fewer people talk about the wind at Wrigley, and fewer people talk about the right field line at Yankee Stadium, old or new, and
or the lack of foul territory in Oakland.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, exactly. So maybe if you could discuss some of the lesser known examples of that throughout history, and maybe tell us what you think about the way Rockies hitters and pitchers are viewed, and then maybe how they should be viewed.
I think once you begin sprinkling asterisks, whether actual or mental, there is no end. We have Baker Bowl in 1930, where the Phillies finished last, despite batting, 319, I think it was. The National League batting average as a whole was over 300. The Phillies pitchers allowed 6.7 earned runs per game. In 1884, Ned Williamson hit 27 home runs, 25 of them at home, 2 on the road. So when Babe Ruth broke the home run record in 1919, everyone thought that he was shooting for either Gabby Kravitz's mark of 24 or Buck Freeman's mark of 25, and everyone had forgotten about Ned Williamson's 27. So
Wow.
have to have an understanding of circumstance. And this is one thing that baseball fans are excellent at, and that's grounding themselves in the history and understanding that raw numbers don't tell the story. If you put asterisks alongside those raw numbers, that wouldn't tell the story either. You are driven to the history books. You are driven to the normalized averages, and normalized averages, which Pete Palmer and I pioneered, I believe, in the early 1980s, along with Dick Kramer, Bill James, you name him, place individual accomplishments in the context not only of ballpark, but also of league year and circumstance, so that if you hit 60 plus home runs in 1998, it's not quite the same thing as hitting 60 in 1927. And it's not even quite the same as hitting 25 in 1894. Every statistic has to be taken in its context. In the matter of the Rockies, everyone looks at home runs and looks at batting average. And the altitude question has produced baseballs being stored in humidors, but the tremendous advantage to Coors has been not home runs, but singles. Outfielders have to play so deep that balls fall in over the shortstop or second baseman's head that would be easy catches in every other park. So batting averages are unquestionably inflated by the Coors effect. Is this a problem for the game? I don't think so. I think it is a feature, not a bug.
And now I'm going to ask participants to start to think about and maybe type in some questions because I'm going to shortly turn to those questions. This is something that's interested me, and I'm sure a lot of other people over over the years with respect to the Hall of Fame. First of all, do you think it's a good thing that the criteria laid out by the Hall of Fame so long ago is vague in terms of voting? You know, what you need to see in a player to vote him into the Hall of Fame, and obviously then secondly, with respect to Pete Rose and also to the steroid era players, how do you see their candidacies? I guess particularly now Clemens and Bonds, because they're the closest to perhaps getting in, even though their time is running out.
I think the Baseball Hall of Fame as an institution has a history all its own and has procedures all its own, and they may elect whom they please by whatever lights they may choose. Keeping Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds out, or Joe Jackson and Ty Cobb out, fits their mission statement. All 4 of those I just mentioned are in my personal Hall of Fame, which I carry between my ears and is, in my view, superior to the Hall of Fame in Cooperstown. Maybe Rick Farrell doesn't get in. Maybe Lloyd Wainer doesn't get in. Maybe Tommy McCarthy doesn't get in to my personal Hall of Fame. But I'm not advocating for removal of plaques. And I'm certainly not an advocate for a character clause. because I would not want my character or anyone else's character judged en masse by the members of the Baseball Writers Association who have been carrying cards for 6 or 10 years or whatever the current criterion may be. I think that the baseball writers have done, by and large, an outstanding job of electing the right people and keeping out the wrong people. But of course, I have quibbles with some of it, just as every fan may. And it is the argumentation over who's in and who's out that is indeed the lifeblood of Cooperstown.
That's a great point. I think the debate is the most fun part. And, you know, as everyone has their own way of analyzing a player's legacy, and analyzing what that player did during their career. And so I guess you're right. I mean, if we didn't have these debates, you know, what fun would it be every winter when the ballots come out?
The Hot Stove League would be a boring place.
Yes, absolutely. John, thank you so much. I've got some questions here. Let's go to those. And this is very informal, so we might bounce back and forth between topics and between questions from the group and questions from myself. The first, Chip asks, is there any new information regarding your Pittsfield, Massachusetts fine from a few years back?
Well, there's this, that the founding fathers of Pittsfield, as they are currently constituted, pounced upon the news of the 1791 prohibition to declare themselves the Garden of Eden and the substitute location for the invention of baseball. Baseball was not invented in Pittsfield. It was not invented in Cooperstown. It was not invented. Henry Chadwick had it right 125 years ago, and he said, like Topsy, it just growed. We don't know what that first dandelion in the field was. We just see a field of dandelions at some point in the late 18th century. Oh, and let me add this to the Pittsfield.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
That David Block, who wrote the wonderful Baseball Before We Knew It in 2004 or 2005, has maintained all along that while baseball spelled in that way was prohibited by the ordinance in Pittsfield, that it was probably the same game that was referenced in a Princeton diary of 1786 by a student who said he was tired from playing too much baseball, B-A-S-T-E-B-A-L-L. And I'm persuaded that the difference between the two is mere orthography, that there were many primitive games of baseball going back in this country to the 1720s and 1730s.
There are criticisms of the work, this is from Bill Aubach. There are criticisms of the work of Ken Burns, where am I at? In baseball on some topics, notably Ty Cobb, that quote unquote scholarship took a backseat to popular myth, end quote, i.e. that he passed along good stories, albeit inaccurate ones, at some points, at the expense of tougher research. From your perspective, with the reputation for especially careful research, is this a valid criticism?
It is a valid criticism to say that Ken Burns was not making his film for you as an individual. And you may quibble with his treatment of Ty Cobb, you may quibble with his treatment of Alexander Cartwright, you may quibble with his treatment of Barry Bonds. But this is a film with a point of view. The subtitle, which is very seldom invoked, is The American Epic. Baseball, the American Epic. We tell a story. It is the story told by a filmmaker. Certain things are put in, certain things are left out. Errors, no doubt, are made or are later revealed to have been errors. It does seem to me that we did a pretty good job. And I don't see anyone else funding an 18-hour baseball film to succeed it, which doesn't mean that it's not going to get some refrigerator fur on it over time. And you may quibble with the treatment of Ty Cobb, especially the Ty Cobb proponents like to think that he became a mellow progressive in his old age, though he may have been racist in his playing days. I personally don't buy it, but also I'm not the village explainer for Ken Burns or for the film Baseball.
This one from Christopher Cohen, the National League, and this is something that I suppose that you might be willing to get into about the current situation. The National League has been reportedly looking into the designated hitter for a while, and it is beginning to seem more likely that the NL gets a DH in the coming years. What effects do you believe that this would have on both the on and off, both on the field and off for National League teams?
Well, those who go to a baseball game looking forward to a double switch will be disappointed. But I don't know anybody who goes to a ball game for that reason. To me, the DH was heresy when it was introduced. I have come to love the DH over the years because I have come to hate watching pitchers bat. The increasing ineptitude of National League pitchers, and don't tell me about Bumgarner and don't tell me about Greinke, because they are the exceptions to the rule. National League pitchers are an embarrassment, and strategy is dictated by yanking the pitcher before his third at bat, regardless of how effective he may be on the mound. So I think there will be strategic implications for the DH in the National League. There will be strategic implications in roster development and roster creation, just as we have taken Jerry Blevins and his like, the one-out left-handed specialist, the loogie, and told him to sit on the sidelines indefinitely. Rules changes do have effects on clubs, on players, on leagues. Some of it will have unintended consequences, and we await the results.
For those who don't know, there's an interesting story behind why the National League declined to adopt the designated hitter. And maybe John, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the trivial way in which the National League ended up without a designated hitter way back in 1970, was it 76?
73, 72, 73, that off season.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if Ruley Carpenter of the Phillies hadn't gone on a fishing trip, he would have been there to cast the vote that would have created the universal DH. Now, the DH was originally a proposal of the National League and William Chase Temple in 1892. So this is a very old idea, and people have been complaining about pitcher hitting since time immemorial. The Ruley Carpenter story is funny, but I think after nearly 50 years of the DH existing everywhere except one league in Japan and one league in the US, it's time.
Wonder what that league in Japan's going to do in the next couple of years once they're the only ones left.
Well, there may be a point of pride in
mantle.
maintaining. There may be a point of pride.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So here's one from Kurt Wells. I consider Rube Waddell to be the most colorful character of the game. Who would be at the top of your list?
I love Waddell. There's no question about it. Now, Waddell's quirkiness is augmented by his idiocy. I mean, he was probably an 80 IQ ball player and got into one sort of fix after another and was gullible and could be persuaded to do anything. But he was also, this is something fans, I think by and large don't know, that he holds to this day the American League record for most strikeouts by a left-hander. Since 1904, this may be baseball's oldest record. Not counting Hugh Duffy's 440 in 1894, I suppose, and other things may come to mind. But for most colorful is absolutely a subjective category, and everyone is welcome to his own interpretation. King Kelly is my favorite, and Waddell's right up there with him.
That leads to another question. What are there records that you see falling soon, and is anybody going to hit 400 again? Given the number of different pitchers, the velocity, I think a lot of people would argue it's become tougher to hit over the years.
It is tougher to hit, and it's tougher to exceed the league average in batting average or anything else by more than 40%. Because as the average player, the average skill level of the player improves, as it does generation to generation, it becomes harder for the gifted player to exceed the average. by the extent to which a Babe Ruth or, oddly, Barry Bonds did in his day. It seems to me that if there are rules and environmental considerations that permit league batting averages to go north of 280, it is at that point that someone may well hit 400. I think these are the things that are linked. Now, not seeing the same pitcher for 4 or 5 at-bats ever since, what, the 1940s, this hurts, because the essence of batting is timing, and the essence of pitching is upsetting timing. So will we see a 400 batter? We nearly did with Tony Gwynn not so long ago, right? 1994, I believe it was. He hit 394 in the abbreviated season. Ted Williams, when he hit 406 in 1941, people don't realize that the sacrifice fly, and he had several, counted as an at-bat. So if we had the current rule for sacrifice flies, he would have hit 411 or 412. Joe DiMaggio was hitting 408, I think, in the second week in September of 1939. Bill Terry hit 401 in 1930. So there was a time in the 1920s, many men hit 400. Hornsby, Heilman, Cobb, and Sisler. So I do think it is, will we see a 400 hitter again? Absolutely. But we have to have an environment in which hitting is encouraged.
I'm going to ask, for those of you who have further questions, go ahead and raise your hand. Let's give this a shot while I finish up with these chat questions. Brian, let's see, Brian Kenny, not that Brian Kenny, but Brian Kenny is asking if you would please talk about John Montgomery Ward and the Players League and what happened with that.
Well, Ward and Keefe founded the Baseball Brotherhood in 1885, and that was an informal sort of players' union to defend player rights, particularly against the increasing use of the reserve clause as a contractual device, because ball clubs were coming in and out of the league in the 1880s. And while they would disband, one of the things they held on to was the reserve for the player contracts, which they could then sell to other clubs. It became an asset of even a failing club. And the players deeply resented being sold without their consent. To them, this was slavery. When the ball players went on tour, first to California, then to Australia, then on to India and Egypt, and the round the world tour of 1888-89, John Ward was the shortstop for the All-Americas Club, and he only learned while he was on board ship that the John Brush classification plan for capping player salaries had gone into effect. It was always a sham, this classification plan, because while a John Ward might be nominally restricted to a $3,000 salary, he'd be given a bonus of $3,000 beyond. But it was an injustice for the average player. And Ward, who was studying law at this time and became a lawyer, became actually a baseball lawyer in the 1910s and the part owner of the Boston Braves. Defended the players, and they didn't go out on strike, but rather formed their own league. So in 1890, this was the year of 3 major leagues: the American Association, the National League, and the Players League. In the wake of that disastrous season in which the 3 leagues ate into each other's profits, the Players League folded, the American Association folded, the National League absorbed 4 American Association clubs and went from 8 to 12. Thus, through the 1890s, it was an unwieldy 12-team league with 1 pennant winner. And you then had to develop not a World Series, but rather a formula by which the first place club played against the second place club in the Temple Cup Series of the 1890s. But I am running on into a history of baseball here.
That brought to mind another question about the current game. I think baseball purists were outraged, when the wild card was introduced. back in 1990. Well, it would have been 94, but 95 officially, with the hometown club here being the first nationally wildcard team. Um, Over time, the wild card has expanded, and we might be seeing now a very large and significant expansion for postseason play in terms of how many teams get in. Do you think that dilutes things too much, or do you think that that's something that is just like with, I think, with people looking back at the first wild card, they'd say, you know what, turned out to be maybe a good thing?
I think we may well look back on this as a good thing. It is an anti-tanking measure because with 15 days left in the season, everybody's going to have a shot at getting into the postseason. And even the number 16 or 15 or 14 seeds, they may be hampered by not having home games or not having anywhere near the number of home games that a higher seeded opponent will have. It does instill into the game its very essence, which is hope.
The next question I've got here is from Chris Moyer. He said, "I'm doing research on the history of the Colorado Springs Millionaires minor league team from 1901 to 05. Two items. The Millionaires played home games in a wood-only ballpark, Boulevard Park, from 1902 to 05. When was the last wood-only or wooden-only ballpark in the majors? And then secondly, he says, I've been looking at box scores from that time frame in which the home team actually hit first. Did Major League Baseball ever have a time in which, in the early years maybe, when the home team hit first?"
Well, taking the second question first, I will say that the team captain had the option of, in every game, whether to hit first or second. And for a long while, it was seen as an advantage to hit first, so home teams would frequently hit first. This vogue, this fashion, went out with the long hemlines of the 1890s, and in the 20th century, it becomes an anomaly. As to the earlier question of when did the wooden ballparks go out, I think a tremendous driver of this was the fire at the Polo Grounds in 1911, when the baseball season was all of a sudden threatened. And when they rebuilt with concrete and steel, following the model of the Athletics in Shive Park and the Pirates and Forbes. Concrete and steel was not only a safety measure, but it stood as a monument to the owner's faith that baseball could be a vital economic engine for decades to come.
On the subject of ballparks, we have now lived through the kind of Renaissance, I guess, era of ballparks where we went back to the, away from the cookie cutter ballparks of the 60s and 70s and 80s and into the more classic retro look and kind of very aesthetically pleasing, look when you observe the game. Do you see the future ballparks as being something along similar lines? This is a tough question, or do you think that it's going to be something futuristic rather than looking back?
I think that the ballpark designs that we're seeing for Oakland are really interesting. I think the ballpark experience at San Diego is really interesting. I think that the model of Arlington, now defunct for the Texas Rangers, was build a ballpark and businesses would build up around the ballpark, has been largely discredited, so that now the Atlanta Braves are in a situation where they're building a new park outside Atlanta city limits, Cobb County, and they will be controlling much of the real estate around the park. The same will be true for Oakland. I think ballparks will be seen as real estate development deals. The ballpark itself, whether it's futuristic or conventional, I think your seating capacities are going to remain 45,000 and under, because it's better to have a full park or an 80% full park at 40,000 than to have 3,000 people in a park that seats 62,000.
Here's a question from David Barry. How significant was Walter O'Malley with us? And I guess we could throw in the Giants as well to San Francisco as it relates to what happened to other clubs' moves in the last 50 years.
The first olive out of the jar is the tough one. And the first team to move was the Boston Braves. And they had such a tremendous success in their attendance from Boston to Milwaukee that it inspired the Athletics to move. It inspired the St. Louis Browns to move to Baltimore. And I think these franchise moves are what persuaded O'Malley and to a lesser extent Stoneham that the Golden West was the next opportunity. The reliability of air transport, the no longer reluctant clubs, who formerly traveled by train to their next destination. Air flight became the way that players and teams moved about. The opening, in Brooklyn, we see O'Malley as a combination of Stalin and Hitler, but he may also be seen as the Johnny Appleseed of baseball, the one who brought baseball to the West and ultimately to the South. When we had 16 clubs in 1953, the farthest west was St. Louis. The farthest south was Washington, D.C., I believe, or possibly also St. Louis. I'm not straight on my Mercator lines here. If baseball was to become the national pastime in the 1950s, it had to do two things. It had to integrate racially, and it had to overspan the nation.
That touches on two points that I want to ask you about. One is, and I guess this ties loosely to what's happening in the country now, but African American participation in baseball has been on the decline for quite some time. And there are people in the game and around the game obviously making great efforts to try to rectify that. I remember talking to Curtis Granderson a few years ago, and just to hear his passion about trying to bring more African American kids into the game. I know part of it is economics because inner city kids a lot of times can't they can't do travel ball, they can't the equipment, the all the
Except for the ones who get scholarships, which is the equivalent of the 19th century ringer, the guy
there
who
you go. So
played for the town team.
how do you see that? How big of a problem do you see that as baseball moves forward? And then the next question after that kind of expands further. Do you see more of a globalized game, not in terms of what's already happened with players coming from more places across the world, but actually MLB going to those places and establishing teams?
I think both are reasonable goals and have been held for decades, if not centuries. The idea that the national pastime would become the international pastime. That's why we have an opening day in Japan or in Monterey or a mid-season contest in London. We periodically try to bring England's old game back, new and improved, to the mother country. That African Americans are in decreasing numbers in Major League Baseball is a bad thing for Major League Baseball, but a good thing for African Americans because it means that they have other opportunities. That baseball is not the only place that a gifted athlete can capitalize on his abilities. And if he's playing football, if he's playing basketball, if he's playing hockey, mazel tov. The fact in baseball that is obscured by the declining percentage of African Americans is the ever rising percentage of players of color, who now constitute, I believe, 38.9% as of last year of all Major League players are men of color. And this was an outcome that Branch Rickey and Jackie Robinson did not envision. They thought certainly that African Americans would come to dominate the game and represent 20 to 40% of the players. It has turned out another way, and I think baseball is sad, rightly sad, that African American players of a certain age, 10, 12, 13, may see more opportunity elsewhere, but it is not a terrible thing for African Americans.
That's really interesting. I think that's a great point. I think we fail to sometimes see that more opportunities have become available over the years, over the decades, and so that's part of the reason. We got a question here from from Wayne Davis. Is the Houston Astros sign stealing scandal, this is interesting, the worst of all baseball scandals?
No, it certainly is not. Clubs and individuals stepping over the line in their attempt to win cannot be as bad as clubs and individuals stepping over the line to lose. So the 1919 World Series fix holds the trophy forevermore.
Do you see, on that topic, do you see the delineation between gamesmanship and cheating? I'll put it out there the way I see it, and maybe some others see it, is that if you are decoding signs yourself, I look at that as a skill, and I look at that as part of a way you can win a game. But when you are using technology or getting having a light go on the clubhouse in center field, in 1951, in the 1951 play-in, with the Giants and Dodgers, is cheating. So how do you see that? How do you see that line, and how blurry or not it is?
In real life, as well as in baseball, we are encouraged to stretch the boundaries as far as they will go without breaking. And we have to have an individual sense of when we have transgressed. And if we have lost that sense and have to be pulled back by someone else, by the organization, by the club, by the league, then you have a scandal. Then you have an issue. When Whitey Ford was wearing a ring that scuffed the baseball, when Gaylord Perry was throwing the spitball, when Lou Burdett was throwing the spitball in contravention to the rules of the day, they paid no price. Ford and Perry went to the Hall of Fame. When Albert Bell has his back crack open to reveal Super Balls inside it, or maybe it was Greg Nettles. This is cheating. And they knew they were cheating. So it wasn't a matter of them pushing up against the line. They knew when they had crossed it. And they were rightly suspended, I believe, 10 games in each case. So a punishment has to fit the crime. And the objection of many people in the Astros Red Sox affair was that the punishment was too mild. I believe it was correct, but you can fight me over a drink at the bar.
There you go. I think a lot of these folks will hold you to it when you're out here in Denver.
All right.
I certainly will. And John, we have a lot of leeway time-wise, and I know that you might have other things to do. So please just chime in if you need to on time matters here. Greg Petty asks, if we end up with an expanded playoff system, do you think that the season would be shorter or shortened, I guess? And would you have a preference for the number 154? Then he says, also, I recently came across a story about the Browns having firm plans to move to Los Angeles for the 1942 season, and they were going to make the announcement on December 8th, 1941. Obviously, the day, everything changed on the 7th. Would you share what you know about that situation?
The Browns could not have moved to California on their own. They would have had to have found another club. No one club was going to go out there. That was a logistical nightmare that the American League would not have permitted. They might have been intending to announce their intent on December 8th. They could not have announced their move. So my guess is that this story has been told over and over again and perhaps interpreted incorrectly.
Baseball history, this is from Kerry Gleason. Baseball history was embellished by colorful journalists like Ring Lardner, Red Smith, and others. Media is changing, obviously. How do you see changes in journalism impacting the growth of the game?
To a greater extent, the reporting and writing skills of the sports writer are secondary to his ability to get player quotes and to get scoops from management. So it is the investigative aspect of reporting that has taken hold, where writing skills are largely in the waste can. And I believe this has been a loss to the game. I think baseball writing has, like the game itself, become dominated by statistics. And if you write a story that tells me that a man had 35 home runs and 140 RBIs and 12 stolen bases and a slugging percentage of 720, my eyelids become heavy. This is not writing. This is prose masquerading as a table, or a table masquerading as prose is a better way to put it.
David Berry asks, how would you rank the top 5 all-time baseball announcers?
Well, I don't rank. I don't do this. This to me is the bane of sports writing. Who is better? It becomes so god-awful tedious. And people who invoke war or some semi-objective standing to make such judgments, this is a substitute not only for writing, it's a substitute for thought. So Graham McNamee, terrible announcer though he was, is got to be in the top 5 because he was first. Anybody who did something first counts. Red Barber was great fun. Mel Allen was largely annoying. Vin Scully, because of the great long career and the wonderful, folksy, commonsensical approach to the game, is probably the best I've ever heard, but I would not rank him above anybody else.
And if anybody has any more questions, or if I missed anybody's question, let me know. I have one. What we're witnessing in Mike Trout currently, I often think to myself, for various reasons, that we shouldn't let this pass by without understanding exactly what we're watching. In both appearance, his frame, and eerily his statistics are reminiscent of Mickey Mantle, except this guy has 2 good knees. How would you characterize Trout's place in baseball history, even though he's only been in the league 10 years? And is this a second Mickey Mantle?
Trout is a Hall of Famer if he retires tomorrow.
Absolutely.
The statistics are there. There's no question about it. But baseball, as we discussed at the very outset of today's talk, is a theatrical entertainment. The audience must be pleased. Now, Gehrig, whose personality to me seems strikingly like that of Trout,
that's an interesting point,
was able to bask in the shadow of Babe Ruth, while Trout is called upon to be the lead actor. He can't be the second fiddle. And
right.
From a personality standpoint, that's not who Mike Trout is. We may wish him to be more colorful. We may wish him to say things that are controversial, but that's not Mike Trout. We come to him and we look at his numbers and we are in awe. This is Lou Gehrig, this is Jimmy Fox, but it's not Babe Ruth, and it's not Ted Williams, and it's not Ty Cobb, and it's not Barry Bonds.
Would you say, because I recall Mickey Mantle saying something about how Casey Stengel wanted him to be kind of more of a, or Ralph Hoke or somebody, whether it's a leader or more of a prominent voice on the club, or whether that's in media or whatever. Do you think Mickey Mantle had a little bit of that, and maybe the whole the reason why he was so widely beloved, or one of them, I'm not going to say the reason, one of them was because he was the last boy I'll take it from Jane Levy, the last boy in that era?
Mantle, like Jeter, was able to step into a Yankee mold that had been created by Joe DiMaggio, which is in some measure antisocial, in some measure aloof, in some measure serene, and in some measure, I just don't care a whit about what you think of me. All of these are seen as admirable characters for those who wear pinstripes. When you wear the uniform of another team, let's say the Boston Red Sox, and you are Ted Williams, or you are Mookie Betts, these character traits can get you in trouble. Very same character traits, viewed differently by partisan audiences.
I love that. That's amazing. I never thought of it that way, but you're right. It kind of reminds me of kind of the inverse of that is Robinson Cano talking about how he felt more free when he left New York
Yes.
in terms of his, you know, his emotions during a game, etc. That's wonderful. I've never really looked at it that way, but I think that's absolutely spot on. This is from Chip. Why are eras relevant? Dead ball, golden, fake grass, steroid. Why are we so obsessed with eras in this game?
Eras are shorthand for conditions of play. And the dead ball era, there's nothing about 1901 that resembles 1919. Yet these are the bookends for the period. The period 1961 to 1993 or 1992 marks an expansion era. That's what we call it. We give it a handle so that we can analyze it and see what characteristics of play may have been similar, and how can we characterize the individual accomplishments within the era. The era is nothing more than a semi-useful construct for greater understanding of individual accomplishment.
Well, I'm going to go and say last call for questions. Let me just say, baseball means a lot to me. It means a lot to everybody, I'm sure, on this call. It's a game that you know, I'm a first generation American born in my family, so and my heritage is Indian, so it's kind of strange that I'm not into soccer or cricket or whatever. You know, my brother and I really bonded over baseball as kids, and it's been such a central part of my life. And to have somebody like you, John, to not only give us more depth of understanding, but to do it in such an elegant way, I want to say thank you for that. Thank you for being with us, because this was tremendous. I hope we can do it again sometime. And if you're in Denver, once we get a hold of this pandemic, if hopefully we do, you know, we'd love to see you at a meeting, or maybe we can get together. Okay, we got one more. Pete Rose played a majority of his career on artificial surfaces. Can there be any correlation to Cobb's career in Detroit, given that they're linked forever?
Rose and Cobb each had certain advantages created by their eras, created by the ballparks, created by scoring systems. If Rose hit a shot directly at shortstop and the shortstop botched it on an artificial surface, it was going to be a single. If Cobb looped a ball over the third baseman's head for a double, sending the third baseman running into foul territory to catch it, that's a product of the level of pitching ability in his day and the approach to batting that Cobb took. There really is no direct comparison between the man who had 4,189 hits, Cobb, and the man who had 4,256 hits, Rose. You need sabermetric intervention by normalizing and ideally historical understanding.
I think the number that a lot of us have in our head is 4191. Can you explain what happened with that?
Well, Cobb got forward 4191 in some measure because of a double entry in the Detroit Tigers annual scoring records. And everyone else's double entry was recognized and pulled from the official record. But Cobb's was not, because Ban Johnson wanted Cobb to retain the batting title over Nap Lajoie, because both wound up getting Chalmers cars as their prizes for the batting championship, and Johnson did not want to create a further tempest. So Cobb had 2 extra hits there. He may have had an extra hit denied to him and an extra hit credited. I believe Baseball Reference currently has 4190 as his correct total, and I go along with that entirely. Total Baseball waged war with the Elias Sports Bureau and with Major League Baseball back in the 80s over changing Cobb's record from 4191 to 4189.
And unless we have any more questions, I'll end by asking you this. Just kind of wrap it up. Baseball is, historically a leisure league game, or it's called a pastime. It's pastoral. I think a lot of people are, the way I put it is, a lot of people are trying to fit a square peg into a round hole when they try to mold the game a little bit to fit today's rapid lifestyle, today's shorter attention spans. I've always said I would be perfectly content watching a 4-hour baseball game, extra inning baseball game. But a lot of people these days, especially in the millennial generation, don't have of which I guess I can put myself in. I take credit. I'm right at the back end, so I take credit when they get credit, which is not often, and then I disqualify myself when it's beneficial. But do you feel that baseball is a game that is fine and doesn't really need significant changes other than minor tweaks here and there?
Baseball is a game that has always tinkered with itself, and the major changes, pitching distance, adding a foul strike in 1903 and 1905 in the 2 leagues, because up until that point, you could hit foul balls forever and they wouldn't count as strikes. Minor changes in this game, because it's so delicately balanced, can bring untoward major results. This is the beauty of the game for me. And it seems to me that baseball, unlike the nearly continuous action sports of basketball and hockey, is better suited to the sports tastes going forward, which are going to tilt toward gambling. And the pauses between plays, which formerly were thought of as a good thing because they permitted conversation, are now regarded as a good thing because they permit somebody to place a bet.
John, this has been tremendous. Thank you for being with us today. I'm sure I speak for everyone. Let me get to our president, who I have stifled all meeting long here. Go ahead and unmute yourself, Paul. All right, hold on. I'll get you. Okay, go ahead and unmute yourself. I've unmuted you. You've got to. I think you've got to unmute yourself now. Can't hear you.
Well, this is just the way I like Paul.
How about now?
There you go.
Right. Alas, we can hear you, yes.
But unfortunately, I can't see anybody. I just wanted to say on behalf of the chapter, John, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to sit and listen and learn from you. You're beyond articulate. You're eloquent. And thank you for joining us today. I want to also thank, I saw Chris Moyer was pretty much saying the same thing, but I want to thank Alex Marks and Manny Rendawa as well for putting this together today. So we are very grateful.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks, Paul. All the credit to John. I mean, it was, I just sent him a direct message, honestly. That was it. And he's like, okay. And so that was wonderful. So thanks, John. And maybe we can do this again.
Thank you, Manny. It's been a great pleasure.
Wonderful. Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.